is Fatmah. I'm a student in Swadaya Gunung Djati University. I'm from English Education Department from 1B class. Here I want to present about Puritan period for literature mid test and the table of the content, history, characteristic, and literature work on Puritan period. The history. In the middle of 16th century, the church in England split into two movements, Anglican in power and Puritans to become rivals. The Puritans are a group of Protestants who want to repurify Protestant teachings in England. At that time was Queen Elizabeth regent as Queen of England. Queen Elizabeth has a dislike for Puritans who want to purify the teachings and rituals that Queen Elizabeth corrupted. Puritans protest against Queen Elizabeth to return to the teachings of the Bible and not to boost too much. However, this protest was completely ignored by Queen Elizabeth. And in early 17th century, on March 24, 1603, Queen Elizabeth died after more than 4 decades on the throne. After the death of Queen Elizabeth, her brother, James IV of Scotland, came to be known as James I in England to replace the throne. British citizens are expecting a new start with the presence of a young king who is 36 years old. And then in 1605, the gunpowder plot occurred, which was an unsuccessful plan to blow up the Parliament building in Westminster. King James I survived this incident. This resulted in a persecution of minority Catholic in England. After that, King James I was also involved in conflict with the Parliament, where the cost of the kingdom became increasingly attractive as well as taxes. But the royal income was not sufficient. The only solution used was to increase the rental price of the royal land. The power of the Parliament made it biased that the Parliament refused to raise money for the king. This led King James I to look for other ways to raise money. And the situation is further complicated by religious difference, where the most of the MPs are Puritan who want to purify the church in England from a Catholic remnant. Even though James I was a Protestant, he rejected. On the other hand, James I believed in the divine right of the king, where according to him, the king was given power by God in terms of regulation. James I hopes to cooperate with Parliament, even though he thinks the right of the highest authority is from him. In 1625, James I died at the age of 58, then succeeded by his son Carlos I. Carlos I also believed in the divine right of the king. Not much different from his father, Carlos also quarreled with Parliament. In December 1647, Carlos made a secret treaty with Scotland. They agreed to attack England on his behalf, but Oliver Cromwell destroyed an army of Scottish and British royalty at Preston. Attacking the king did not mean that the problem was resolved, because after that a rift emerged between the Parliament, the new model army, and the Scots, who each wanted more power. Civil War II was won by the new model army. After Carlos I was executed, Oliver appointed himself. Carlos I became the head of the British nation, and Britain was changed into a republic of approximately 11 years, from 1649 until 1660. In 1650, Carlos II made an agreement with Scotland for a second war, but in September 1650, Cromwell destroyed Scotland at Dunbar. Cromwell then crossed the Firth of Forth, leaving the road to England open. A new constitution was created called a government instrument. Cromwell was appointed Lord Protector. Initially, he ruled with a council, but in September 1654, a new parliament was called. The Protectorate Parliament refused to accept government instrument, so Cromwell dissolved it in January 1655. And then in 1655, the country was divided into 11 districts. Each district is governed by a major general. However, in 1656, another parliament was called. At this time, some members were excluded as unworthy people. But when Parliament regrouped in January, members who had been excluded in 1656 were allowed to take their seats. This time, the member attacked the new arrangement, would not accept the newly nominated upper house, and Cromwell dissolved the parliament again in February 1658. Oliver Cromwell appointed his successor, Richard, as his successor. Richard was shy and unambitious, and he resigned in May 1659. The Long Parliament voted to dissolve and hold new election for a new parliament. In 1670, Carlos made a secret treaty with Louis of France. It's called the Dover Treaty. With that, Louis promised to give Carlos money to he was no longer dependent on Parliament. Carlos agreed to join Louis in another war with the Netherlands and to announce he was a Roman Catholic. King Carlos II died in 1685. He was 54 years old. Carlos II had no legal children, and when he died, his Catholic brother James was next to the throne. After Carlos II's death in 1685, his brother James became king. And next, I will explain about the characteristic in Puritan period. The first, literature during Puritanism did not have unity of soul. Maksudnya, pada periode ini, sustraan periode Puritan tidak memiliki kesatuan jiwa seperti yang terdapat pada sustraan pada periode Elizabeth. And the number two, gloomy and sad. Jadi berlainan dengan tulisan-tulisan pada zaman Elizabeth yang penuh harapan dan daya, sustraan pada periode ini bersifat muram dan menimbulkan rasa sedih serta tidak memberikan inspirasi. And the last is losing its romanticism. gradually changed to be critical and intellectual, tended to stimulate the mind rather than the feeling. Kesusastraan pada periode ini telah kehilangan gairah romantis masa muda dan menjadi kritis, intelektual, dan lebih merangsang pikiran daripada perasaan. Selanjutnya yaitu ada literature work on Puritan period. First, poetry. The most known or famous in this period, famous poetry type on this period is metaphysic poetry, cavalier poetry, and Puritan poetry. Metaphysic poetry, written in the 7th century by English poets whose poetry was characterized by an intellectually challenging style, and this poetry used as a media for mental and spiritual exercise. Jadi, puisi metafisik ini ditulis pada abad ke-17 oleh para penyair Inggris yang puisinya ditandai dengan gaya yang menantang intelektual dan mengandung metafora yang diperluas hal yang berbeda. Dan puisi metafisik ini sering menjadi media bagi pembaca pada periode Puritan ini untuk latihan mental serta spiritual. Puisi mereka ditandai dengan kelihayan dan religiusitas di dalamnya. Kemudian ada cavalier poetry. This poetry expressed the joy and fulfillment of many more lively things, and promoting leadership and poets. The style of this poetry is metaphorical or classic style. Jadi, puisi kavalier ini berbeda dengan puisi tradisional mengenai subjeknya. Alih-alih menutupi tema seperti agama, filsafat, dan seni, puisi kavalier bertujuan untuk mengungkapkan kegembiraan dan pemenuhan banyak hal yang lebih hidup dibandingkan dengan karya tradisional pendahulunya. Dan tujuan puisi ini biasanya untuk mempromosikan kepemimpinan. Next, ada Puritan poetry. This poetry focused on devotion to God and that all of his actions are a sign of his love or wrath. And like literature, but it still follows a general poetic structure. Puisi Puritan ini berfokus pada pengabdian kepada Tuhan dan mereka percaya bahwa semua tindakannya merupakan tanda cinta atau kemurkaan. Selanjutnya ada some writer for metaphysic poetry. There are John Donne. Most of his poetry and his works are known for their strong and sensual style and consist of religious poems, love poems, sonnets, Latin translation, elegies, songs, satires, sermons, and epigrams. And some of his beberapa karyanya yaitu berjudul Holy Sonnet 10. Kemudian ada George Herbert. Herbert did not write love poetry. He decided to devote his poetic work to God. Jadi George Herbert tidak menulis puisi cinta, melainkan sebuah puisi untuk Tuhan atau kepada Tuhan, yang bertujuan kepada Tuhan. Salah satu karyanya yaitu ada The Temple dan The Flower. Kemudian ada Andrew Marvell. All of his poetry show his exclusivity and immeasurable diversity in its entirety and in its entirety including love lyric, satire, and religious works. Salah satu karyanya yaitu ada Upon Appleton House dan To His Coy Mistress. Selanjutnya ada beberapa penulis dari Cavalier Poetry. Pertama ada Robert Herrick. Beberapa karyanya yaitu ada To the Virgin to Make Much of Time, kemudian To Enjoy the Time, dan To Daffodils. Kedua ada Richard Livillage. Salah satu karyanya yaitu To Althea from Prison. Dan yang terakhir yaitu Thomas Carew. Salah satu karyanya yaitu To His Mistress in Absence. And next, this is another poetry writer on Puritan period. First, there are John Milton. He is very famous in Puritan period, and some of his literature, there are sonnet on his blindness, and then Samson Agonistes, and yang paling terkenal itu Paradise Lost. Kemudian ada Henry Vaughan dan Abraham Cowley. Next, prose. The clash between Anglican and Puritan followers had impact on the increasing number of prose. Francis Bacon and Thomas Hobbes attempted to make the readers realize that the problem at the time could only face it attentively and rationally. One of the prose writers of the Puritan period, John Bunyan. He is known for his allegorical work, The Pilgrim's Progress. The work is an allegory of the world. Bunyan is a poor and uneducated person. He was completely ignorant of Renaissance culture and had no basic in Greek and Roman culture. But he was heavily involved with the Reformation in England. Bunyan has a Puritan spirit and spirit as reflected in his work, The Pilgrim's Progress. The Pilgrim's Progress is an allegorical journey undertaken by someone who represents mankind in general. The journey starts from the city of destruction or mortal life to the celestial city or city of heaven or the afterlife. This journey is full of suffering, sorrow, and temptation. During his journey, this person experienced various forms of sadness, seduction, temptation, but he never gave up on reaching the holy city, and his struggle eventually resulted in victory. And the last, drama. In the Puritan period, drama in England was strictly prohibited because from the historical point of view, drama in England suffered a serious decline, especially after the aristocracy was ruled by the Puritans. In 1642, the theatres were closed by the majority of the British Parliament, who considered the theatre to be a den of immorality. Practically, in this day and age, the activity of drama performance dropped dramatically, and drama suffered a great decline. Because of this factor, Not much of history records that drama in the Puritan era was known by literature. In that harsh reality too, writers at the time were not too interested in the development of drama at the time because indeed between the rules that were determined and the content that could be taken from the drama uh, appearance made the writers reluctant to develop drama. Jadi drama pada periode Puritan ini mengalami kemunduran hingga banyak teater yang ditutup oleh para penguasa Puritan pada tahun 1642 karena drama dianggap sebagai sarang-sarang kemaksiatan. That's all from me. Please correct me if there is any mistakes, and sorry if there are many mistakes, and thank you for watching.